You've got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the
An experience that I had back in 2015 set me on this path. It's really been a 10-year journey now. I've been involved in fire for 10 years, and it started this way. On a summer morning in 2015, while camping on Hornby Island, I awakened to an orange glow. Our tent was orange, so at first I thought it was sunlight shining through the fabric. But when I crawled out, I could see that the trees, the nearby islands, the air as far as I could see was suffused with orange light and redolent with smoke. To the east, above a nearby island, was the rising sun, a pale and faceless coin, so unlike the sun, it led a neighbor to wonder aloud if it was the moon we were looking at. An older woman camping nearby said it reminded her of the sky during the London Blitz. Before us, the sea lay nearly motionless beneath an oily calm. Sound did not carry in the normal way, nor did light refract. No birds sang. This place, where my family and I have camped for 20 years, a place of peace and profound beauty, had been transformed while we slept. A fire-lit pall had settled over the island, the coast, and with it an awful waiting stillness. We would soon learn that miles away, all around us, wildfires were burning in the rainforest. Should the island ignite, there was nowhere to go but into the sea. I took stock of my wife and children, of our situation, and I wondered to myself, perhaps this is how it ends. So obviously that really shook me. And until that moment, until that morning, I had really thought that wildfires were a Southern California problem. They were an Australian problem. And up here in the rainforest, we were good. And I stopped thinking that. I did not have that reassurance anymore after that experience. I don't think any of us were expecting to find ourselves on the bleeding edge of epochal geologic change, but we are, and here in beautiful West Van, we have a front row seat to the future. Back in 2016, when the petro city of Fort McMurray burned from end to end, along with 2,500 square miles of boreal forest, students of fire understood that we are entering a new era of intensifying fire behavior, what fire historian Stephen Pine calls the Pyrocene age. The Fort McMurray fire, which drove the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times, 80,000 people in an afternoon, and hobbled Canada's billion-dollar petroleum industry for months, was seen by many as remote and anomalous, nothing to do with them. Though it occurred less than a decade ago, that was a more innocent time. Most of the horrific fires we can now reel off by name, Lahaina, Paradise, Jasper, LA, had not yet ignited. But time is flying, and we're now a quarter of the way through an historic century, which will see the cresting of fossil fuel use and of human population in conjunction with a cataclysmic loss of species and ecosystem integrity, forest integrity. These are not abstract events lurking in the future, they're fully underway, right here, right now. A century ago, Ernest Hemingway wrote a novel called The Sun Also Rises, and there are a couple of lines in it that have stayed on my mind. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. Well, two ways, Mike said. Gradually, and then suddenly. And this applies equally well to the last 50 years of observed and tracked climatic changes. There's no getting around the fact that weather is different now, and fire is different now. The Earth's expressions are intensifying and accelerating. As we gather here, rapidly increasing excess heat generated by fossil fuel emissions is pushing the limits of human endurance. 50 Celsius, 122 Fahrenheit, is an increasingly common summer temperature, and not just in the Middle East. Incredibly, we've felt those temperatures right here in BC. And we now know from hard-won personal experience that temperatures like these are lethal to humans and to many tree species, but fire thrives in them. In July of 2023, Thomas Smith, an environmental geographer at the London School of Economics, made a sober observation to the BBC. "I'm not aware of a similar period," he said, "when all parts of the climate system were in record-breaking or abnormal territory. 2023 was a turning point. What appears to be happening now is a nonlinear acceleration. Look at any metric of planetary distress." So these are autumn temperatures averaged out around the globe going back to 1980, so basically the past 45 years. And what you see normally in Earth's atmosphere, Earth's temperatures, is fluctuation. That is normal to happen through the year and from year to year. But what we also see is this steady trending upward over the decades. All of us have witnessed this. But look at that jump in 2023. This is North Atlantic sea surface temperatures for the whole year. That colorful spaghetti, again, is the past 40 years. It's steadily warming, going through the blues and purples into the yellows. That red up at the top there, that's kind of taking off by itself, is 2023, and then coming in over here on the left, I don't have all the data yet, is 2024, which is warmer still. So this is the high Arctic. This is off of Svalbard, Norway. Again, over the past 40 years, that black and white spaghetti there are average temperatures taken through the decades. And then 2024 is on a completely different trajectory. Same ocean, really different temperature. And Svalbard is not Vegas. What happens up there does not stay up there. So this is the North Pacific Ocean. We're way over there on the right. You can see Canada. And up there you can see the dark red indicates a 5 Celsius anomaly. And I think calling it anomaly is a misnomer. It's, you know, the temperature in this ocean on which we all depend that shapes our weather is changing in real time. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, Canadians in particular, that's what is that body of water called? I just blocked it out. Thank you. That is Hudson's Bay. And so that is also 5 or 6 degrees above normal. And so that's kind of where, these are our home waters that we're looking at. So these extremes are widespread now, but that doesn't mean they're normal. Some early map makers describe unknown parts of the globe back in the day as terra incognita. Our planet and our civilization are now entering clima incognita, the unknown climate. In so doing, we're departing the Holocene epoch. That was the Goldilocks zone of relative climate stability that enabled us to build the world as we know it over the last 12,000 years. To borrow from another children's story, The Three Little Pigs, we've built our homes and infrastructure out of 20th century straw, and now there's a 21st century wolf at the door. And that wolf, of course, is climate change in the form of extreme weather. So we, all of us, must recognize this moment for what it is. It's the beginning of a new era of civilizational retreat, contraction, and consolidation. So there's a term I want to introduce to you, and that's discontinuity, an event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide to future problem solving. So that's what we're coming into now. And Alex Steffen, he's a futurist working out of Berkeley, California. I urge you to look at his work. He's easily found online. He is a very wise person looking bravely into the future in a very can-do, useful way. He is not a doomer. So firefighters, though, have been experiencing discontinuity more and more often. With increasing regularity, firefighting efforts are devolving into life-saving efforts, LA being but one example, but Jasper was right up there too. It's an extraordinary moment we find ourselves in. Never before have technology, culture, and nature been moving so quickly simultaneously? And one reason why I think we have a hard time wrapping our heads around this is because we're used to being the stars of the show. Historically, it's been humans who've outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to AI, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time. But now geologic time, climate time, atmospheric time, glacier time is moving as fast, in some cases faster than we are, faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. I began to understand the implications of this acceleration when Fort McMurray caught on fire back in 2016. Fort McMurray is a good place to learn about fire and petroleum and how they fuel the volatile and all-consuming appetites of petrocapitalism. There are a couple of pieces to this, and I'm going to go through them in the order that I first explored them, but I'll start with fire. If you live on the North Shore, here's a term you need to know. This is the WUI, as it's called. Firefighters here know it well. The wildland-urban interface. It's where we are right now. It's where half of all Canadians live. It's a place that provides us enormous comfort. You know, for Canadians, the woods, the forest is our soul home. It's what makes us feel right and connected and good and peaceful. It's also where wildfires, enter our communities from. And that's where it's so relevant to where we are now. So this is, wildfire's natural on the landscape, and this is kind of how you want to see it. You want to see it on the other side of a ridge, and you want to see pale smoke, and you want to see it from many kilometers away. This is what Fort McMurray firefighters saw from Hall 5 south of downtown in Fort McMurray on May 2nd, 2016. So there's no fire in the community yet. There's a fire out in the forest there, but look at those black coils. There's a lot of energy in there. And when it's burning black, you know it's probably into black spruce or it's into houses. And that's out in the forest there, so it's safely there. The fires are normal in the boreal, but this one was different. And they had jumped on it 2 days earlier when the smoke first popped up. They had Bambi buckets, helicopters on there, hotshot crew, and it was so hot and so dry that they could not douse it. So what's been going on up there, you've had 2 years of drought in 2016. The temperature had broken the daily record, the record for that date, by 6 degrees Celsius. So it was about 33 degrees Celsius, but more ominous in a way and completely invisible to most of us was the relative humidity. And I was looking at weather records and I saw this relative humidity of 12%. And I didn't know what that meant. Firefighters know what it means, but I'm a civilian, I didn't know. So but it sounds low, right? So I started looking around and I had to go to Death Valley in the month of July to find a place where 12% humidity was normal. And that was the humidity 700 miles north of here. And that is its own kind of fuel for fire. Oh, oops, we don't want to look at that yet. I'm going to read a brief passage from the book that, to me, some of you may have heard this already, my apologies, but it's sort of where all of us are right now. In Fort McMurray, May 3rd, 2016 began differently for everyone, but it ended the same. For Chandra Linder, it began with a rite of spring. Linder was a labor relations advisor who worked for Syncrude, a bitumen company up there. Linder's husband, Corey, an engineer, was employed there too, and so were many of their friends. Blonde with a pixie cut, Linder is fit and warm and does not suffer fools. It makes sense once you get to know her, but to an outsider it might be surprising to see someone so polished and female in such a remote, industry-oriented, testosterone-heavy place. I don't know if you've read Ducks by Kate Beaton, who's at the festival right now in Vancouver. She wrote an amazing account of what it's like to be a woman working up there. The gender ratio is about 25-1 on site. It's a very weird, uncomfortable, often place to be. if you're a woman. So for work, Linder dresses accordingly: minimal makeup, high collars, dark pants, no heels. Clothes suitable for climbing in and out of trucks and SUVs, for working in a world of working men. Linder had already seen the smoke plume southwest of town because everyone had seen it. A windswept cauliflower of billowing grays and browns that appeared to have sprouted full-blown from the forest on Sunday afternoon. That was 2 days earlier. It had been growing since then, but it was still miles away, kilometers away, and it wasn't the only one. Over the weekend, the Linders had hosted friends evacuated due to another fire. It was almost a lark. They took photos of the big plume developing across the river the same way one would a sunset or a rainbow. Their friends went home the next day because forestry was on it. Boots were on the ground. Water bombers were in the air. As far as the Linders were concerned, whatever was out there was being handled because that's what people do in Fort McMurray. They handle things. Certainly the beginning of May was a little early for fires, and there were still car-sized blocks of winter ice on the riverbanks, and some local lakes had yet to thaw, but otherwise this was nothing new. Fires cloud the horizon every spring and summer up there. As Chandra and Corey Linder said practically in chorus, it happens every year. Given the unseasonable heat and the fact that 5 separate wildfires had ignited around the city that weekend, it's hard to overstate how unconcerned was Fort McMurray's citizenry. But if you were up at dawn on May 3rd, as Chandra Linder was, and you had seen the sky so full of summer promise as she had, you might understand why. The brilliance of that morning was so exceptional that after her morning shower, Linder did something she hadn't done in a long time. She pulled out her favorite navy blue suit with the skirt, picked some medium heels to go with it, and left her socks in the drawer. And thus, attired, she headed off to work in Syncrude's head office north of town. In her garage, there were a few vehicles to choose from, and in keeping with her outfit and her mood, Linder picked the car she calls the little one, a black Porsche that hadn't seen daylight in 6 months. So there was a national census done in 2016, as you may recall, and one of the things they discovered was that the median household income in Fort McMurray, 2 years after a global downturn in 2014, a global downturn in petroleum prices, 2 years after that, the median household income was still $200,000 a year. Anyway, winters are long and dark in Fort McMurray, but this one was over, spring was here, and Linder felt as beautiful and hopeful as the day. So now we're going to stay on May 3rd. We're going to jump ahead 4 hours to the early afternoon. Still feeling the symptoms of spring fever, Chandra Linder knocked off work at lunch and organized herself for a 2 o'clock meeting at Syncrude's downtown office in the Borealis building. With no traffic, it's a 30-minute drive down the highway. Still 20 kilometers north of downtown, she was rounding a long, gradual bend in the river when her windshield filled with something she did not recognize. When I got that first view of it, said Linder, I went, hang on a second. It was clear overhead, but to the south, it was black. Black smoke with streaks of red in it. It took up the whole sky. I'm trying to make sense of this thing. I'm thinking, well, maybe it just looks closer than it is. I'm thinking maybe the red is the sun shining through the smoke. But it's not the sun. It's in the wrong place. And then I realize it's flame. Linder has seen a lot of fire plumes, but this didn't look like any of them. So I pull over to the side of the highway and I call my guy Byron and I say, are we having this meeting? And he's like, no, we are not having this meeting. Don't come in. And I'm like, I'm looking at a wall of flames here. It was a short call, in part because no one was quite sure what to say next. What do you say on a beautiful spring day when the city where you live and conduct business appears to be on fire? After hanging up, Linder continued on to her exit, where she turned west, back up the hill and out of the river valley. Okay, she said, not right. Here's what I do. I'm going to go home anyway. I drive past the dry cleaners. Well, I'm going to drop off my stuff at Sam's place because in my mind, the fire's still on the other side of the river, downtown. So I'm dropping my stuff off, and this guy comes in from the golf course in full golf apparel, and he's like, holy shit, we just got evacuated from the golf course. And I'm like, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here to pick up my dry cleaning. And I said, what golf course were you on? Because we have two in town. He says, Thickwood, meaning the fire has just jumped the river. The Athabasca River by the Thickwood Golf Course is half a kilometer wide. So, continued Linder, Sam, the dry cleaner, who's our buddy, is on the phone to his wife. Honey, it just jumped the river. Get out. Get out. Get out. In all this craziness, Sam still takes my dry cleaning, logs it, and he's like, Tuesday good? And I'm like, yeah, next Tuesday's great. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on May 3rd, Linder tucked her laundry ticket safely in her wallet and aimed the Porsche for home. So that was 2 in the afternoon, and this is 2:45. Gradually, and then suddenly. So I had the strange privilege of speaking to the man who took that photo. It's Paul Ayerst. He's sitting in his pickup truck. He's shooting across the dashboard. He's the last civilian out of the Beacon Hill neighborhood that was flattened by the fire. And he is sitting there. He is not driving anywhere because it's a Tim Hortons drive-through lineup all the way down to Highway 63, and it's bumper to bumper on 63 heading south. Everybody is trying to get out of the city at the same time, and so he is sitting there in that fire. And in front of him, the taillights you see, that's his wife's car and his daughter's car. And they are sitting there as balls of fire roll over them. And there's nothing he can do. He can't call them on the phone because everybody else in the city is trying to call too. He can't get out because everything is on fire. And while he's sitting there, a deer on fire runs into his truck. And I asked him, did you happen to notice the thermometer in your truck? And he said, I did notice it. And I said, what did it say? And he said, it said 66 Celsius. It's 151 degrees. So you will die in that heat. That is a killing heat. So there's nothing he can do. And it's a terrible thing to be a parent, to be a partner, and be absolutely helpless. And you know, those are Canadians in that situation. And the miracle and the mercy is everybody in this photo survived. It's incredible. But that did not happen in California. Doesn't happen in Chile. Doesn't happen in Greece. There are a lot of fatalities. So this is the view of Fort McMurray from 30 kilometers north that same night. That dome is the city burning. And people who ran out of gas and were just sitting there looking back at it, they described to me, it said, it looked like the city had been nuked. And this is what they saw in the morning, and we're horribly used to this now. But in 2016, this was still a novel, shocking sight. This is the Abisan neighborhood, I think. It's very hard to tell. But this is, you know, at the time in 2016, most of us had never seen anything like that. 2 years after the Fort McMurray fire, the 2018 Carr fire forced the evacuation of 40,000 people and devastated portions of Redding, California. In so doing, the Carr fire established a new baseline, not only for California, but for the entire Northern Hemisphere. On a July day that topped out at 113 degrees Fahrenheit, this fire generated an EF3 tornado made of fire, solely by blending its own ferocious thermal energy with ambient local weather. EF3 means a wind speed of 165 miles an hour. That's about 250 K. I've seen a lot of fire damage now, but the destruction I witnessed in Redding, frankly, scarred my psyche. Winds generated during last year's Jasper fire picked up a multi-ton shipping container and threw it 200 meters into the Athabasca River. There's no way for firefighters to combat these superheated, fast-moving fires with or without a tornado in their midst. During the Dixie Fire, which 4 years ago burned 1,500 square miles of forest in Northern California, embers flew 16 kilometers, starting new fires when they landed. What enables an ember to do this? Low humidity and high temperature. Water has little effect on high-intensity wildfires, and fire retardant drops are about as effective as fire breaks. Nothing can stop flying embers. This is a photo only a firefighter could have taken. The fire burned in Fort McMurray all day and all night for about 5 days. And this is on day 3. It's 3 in the morning. You couldn't tell night from day after the first 12 or 14 hours because it was so dark anyway. But this is the Prospect neighborhood taken by a firefighter. And fire hose is really a powerful instrument. It'll knock you out of your chair. It'll push you out the door. What they're trying to do is wet down this outer ring of houses because the inner ring is already burning. But what's happening is if you follow that up and look at where it turns gray, the hose bends, the stream bends and then vaporizes. And that because the energy in that fire is so intense, it's basically pulling the hose in, vaporizing it, and sending it up into the column that's now 40,000 feet into the stratosphere. There's a pyrocumulonimbus system up there. And so it made fire hoses, they did their job, they tried to, but it wasn't super effective. So this is the power of increasing atmospheric CO2. It expresses itself through heat retention, and its vocabulary appears to be growing, most obviously through variations in weather, fire, and related phenomena. Some emerging characteristics of what I call 21st century fire are hotter, faster, more destructive events that burn longer, grow larger, kill more people, and are harder to suppress. Other characteristics include aggressive round-the-clock expansion due to progressively rising nighttime temperatures, and also so-called zombie or holdover fires that can survive our shorter, warmer winters by smoldering underground in root systems and peat, emerging the following spring, now for years on end. Among these new phenomena is a fire-borne thunderhead known to meteorologists as a pyrocumulonimbus cloud, or pyro-CB. This was taken over Portugal this summer. Again, these things go into the stratosphere. They're enormous systems. One of the most exhaustively studied pyro-CB events to date occurred following the 2001 Chisholm Fire in central Alberta. The Chisholm Fire generated a plume so massive that American satellite data analysts initially mistook it for a nuclear bomb test. 45,000 feet tall, it obscured an area of more than 50,000 square miles, about the size of Greece. Those analysts weren't far off. The energy released during that fire's peak 7-hour run was equivalent to 17 1-megaton hydrogen bombs, or about 4 Hiroshima bombs per minute. That's just right over there in Alberta. Pyro-CBs like that one have become significantly more common over the past 2 decades, occurring around the world in places and with a frequency they've never been observed before. During Canada's record-breaking 2023 fire season, which choked the eastern seaboard in toxic smoke and turned skies orange all the way to Europe, our own burning forests generated 142 pyro-CB events. It's a first for planet Earth. In addition to black hail, pyro-CBs can also generate their own lightning. Pyrogenic lightning has been described since ancient times, but almost exclusively in the context of large volcanic eruptions. Pyrogenic lightning can ignite new fires virtually anywhere within a 50-kilometer radius of a pyro-CB. They become a common cause of secondary ignitions across the West and are accompanied by all the hazards associated with electrical storms, tower strikes, power outages, and electrocution. When a forest is primed to burn, as so many are out here, a pyro-CB generating wind-driven embers and lightning can transform a local wildfire into a self-perpetuation machine of destruction operating on a regional scale. The only things that can stop a pyro-CB are a change in the weather or an enormous body of water. It's hard to appreciate the extraordinary energy generated by these fires if you haven't experienced it yourself. So I want to talk briefly about radiant heat. For all you poets and real estate agents out there, radiant heat is the heat that tells you not to touch the candle. And it's invisible, of course, and it moves at the speed of light. The radiant heat coming off the leading edge of a 21st century wildfire can hit 500 Celsius. It's 900 Fahrenheit, hotter than the planet Venus. Radiant heat projects, which means it superheats future fuels, including forests, houses, cars, to the point that they can combust even before the fire arrives. Fire weather took me 7 years to write. I do not recommend that. And when you lock someone in a room for that long, their mind is going to go in some weird directions. And one of the joys and terrors of being a journalist is being able to ask any question you can conjure up. So a couple of years into this project, as I homed in on the fact that fire and people almost always show up at the party together, I posed a couple of unscientific questions, ones that Lori Daniels would never ask, but that I would like to ask her someday. One, is fire alive? And two, do humans and fire have a common ancestor? The answer to the first one, is fire alive? Almost. The answer to the second, do we have a common ancestor? Kind of. Bottom line, both of us are oxygen-driven. Both of us are heat-generating, CO2-emitting appetites, always hunting for fuel to keep us going. There's nothing else as immediately motivating to humans or fire as a lack of oxygen. Just try holding your breath for 90 seconds and notice how you feel. This is from chapter 5. It's fire's nature to strive upward. In other words, to aspire, which means literally to breathe desire into and also to rise. Fire, it can be said, is aspiration in its purest form, desire burning and burning desire, to exist, to consume, to grow, to flourish, all as fervently as we do. Fire does not have consciousness, but it does have character, and there are internal and external factors that motivate, guide, defeat, and deter it. One of those factors is us. There's no other natural force or element over which we have such a compelling illusion of control. Fire is the only natural disaster that can be initiated by a gesture as casual as dropping a match. And this complicates our relationship to it in some profound ways. Since the dawn of the Petrocene age, started about 1860, 1870, just a century and a half ago, we've given fire exponentially more opportunities to engage in all these behaviors we seem to emulate and excel at. But like Ariel to our Prospero, fire is a begrudging servant, selfish and willful. It yearns above all for freedom, which it will take at any opportunity and at any cost. And it's enabled the same impulses in us. The degree to which we have mastered this most primordial of energies borders on the magical, and in this way, with minimal training, we've all become casual wizards. Most of us never see the flames we've conjured up. The car just drives. The plane just flies. The shower just gets hot. The stove burner is not on fire, but a blue flower, blooming day and night, all year round, so simple and safe, and above all contained, even a child can use it. Never in Earth's history or in ours have so many fires been ignited in so many places on such a continuous basis. And when you count every cook fire, every pilot light, every jet engine, every war weapon, every combustion occurring in the cars that we drove here, you get to trillions of fires per day ignited by human beings. Worth noting is the fact that radiant heat, what I just spoke of, is not a random incidental byproduct of fire. It has a purpose, and in this way, fire is the original capitalist. So what do I mean by that? To begin with, fire is a chemical reaction, what chemists call a rapid oxidation event. And you and I are oxidation events too, just much slower ones. But here's the capitalist part. The reason fire generates heat is in order to access more energy, more fuel, more capital. In other words, the heat represents a kind of investment in the expectation that this expenditure of energy will release more combustible hydrocarbons, allowing the fire to not only continue burning, but to grow much, much bigger. The hotter the fire, the richer the fuel, the more rewarding this investment of heat. No wonder we're so drawn to fire energy. And it helps explain how and why our lives have been so thoroughly infiltrated by petroleum products, to the point that the modern home is composed almost entirely of volatile hydrocarbons. When you superheat plastic garbage cans, polyurethane mattresses, and sofa cushions, synthetic rugs, linoleum floors, vinyl siding, and tar shingles, they off-gas, turning every room, not to mention your backyard, into a combustion chamber. The same thing happens in superheated forests. Those sheets and towers of flame we see igniting high above the treetops are clouds of hydrocarbons exploding like vapor in a gas can, just as they do inside the modern petrochemical-infused home. And this is why 50-ton, two-story, $750,000 houses in Fort McMurray were observed burning to their foundations in 6 minutes, leaving nothing but the metal shells of heavy appliances and piles of nails. No one who's witnessed this in Fort Mac, in LA, in Jasper, was prepared for how fast these fires move or how quickly they can make large, expensive objects disappear. This is a kid's bike in LA. That's an F-150 in Fort McMurray. For some reason, these never really caught on. As you've gathered, I'm trying to impress upon you all the world-changing energy our fossil fuel-powered economy has loosed upon the world. Even as it enables the fabulous lifestyle we're still trying to enjoy, it's taking those gains away, endangering all the beings, forests, mountains, and humans alike, who enjoy fire-prone, hydrocarbon-rich areas like this one. Maybe you've heard people say, yeah, but we've always had bad fires. That's true, but not this bad and not this often. So this goes back to 1930. These are mega fires, 100,000 acre plus fires named and measured in the state of California. Well, they used to be pretty rare events back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. You could go a decade without having one. And then look what happens around 2000. That's about when the temperature really started to rise. All of a sudden, you have more mega fires and much, much bigger ones. The LA fire, for perspective, did not even rank on this chart. So like Russia, North Korea, Florida, Texas, and the province of Alberta, the United States government now refuses to acknowledge the grave risk posed by fossil fuel emissions, principally CO2 and methane, and it is actively reversing and undermining efforts to decarbonize our energy and transportation sectors, thereby consigning all of us to an even hotter, more flammable world. In so doing, Washington and Ottawa are handing the future of energy, which is renewables, to China, who's installing more than a gigawatt of wind and solar every day. The biggest customer for Chinese solar panels, which are now pretty much dirt cheap, is the Netherlands, always a progressive place when it comes to environmental threats. As big oil supercharges our economy and its own bottom line with record profits, it's also supercharging our atmosphere with record quantities of greenhouse gases. CO2 levels are now fully 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. This is the familiar Keeling curve. Charles Keeling came out of Caltech in the 50s with a spectrometer that enabled him to measure CO2 in parts per million. Okay, I can measure it, but I have no idea what I'm going to find. He found a baseline. He still didn't know what would happen, but as years went by, on the coast of California where he was doing his readings, he noticed the CO2 kept climbing. And indeed, it has. And we're now at a point, this is a hellacious map, but way over there on the right is the present And we see that red line. It's up at about 430 parts per million. And it's really hard to read, but follow the blue line. We're going through hundreds of thousands of years, then through millions of years. And notice that 420 was just ICP 4.5. Follow that line back. You don't hit that level of CO2 again until about 15 or 20 million years. We have not had this much CO2 in our lower atmosphere in 15 or 20 million years. There were no people then, obviously. The reason this is happening can be summarized in one word: fire. And I don't mean wildfire, I mean fossil fuels. The principal reason we labor and lobby so hard to liberate coal, oil, and gas from the ground is so we can burn it. In other words, if you're in the energy industry in Canada, you're probably in the fossil fuel industry, which means you're in the fire industry, which means you're in the CO2 industry. So in light of this, the most accurate way to calculate the debt on this system of fossil fuel-powered, which is to say fire-powered civilization, is by measuring CO2. And if we understand excess CO2 as debt, then excess heat is the interest on that debt. So this is average temperatures going back to 1850. 19th century was a relatively cool century, but of course you have fluctuation. During World War II, it popped up, then it dropped down, pops up, pops down. That is totally normal in your unmessed with climate. But then you see what starts happening in the 70s, starts to bob up and down. That could still be fluctuation. And then we get into the 90s, and it really starts to climb. And then look, it never drops again. And look at 2023, that's the last bar on the right. Starting around 2000, the rate of global temperature rise accelerated, becoming more noticeable to the general public. What thermometers, fire behavior, and our own bodies are telling us is that our CO2 debt level has become unsustainable, and the interest, the heat, unpayable, to the point that we now find ourselves in the default zone. I know none of you has ever done this, but typically when we default on a loan, the bank calls in the debt. They might even repossess your stuff. And this is one way to understand the steady increase in fossil fuel-enhanced weather disaster. These floods, fires, heat waves, and intensifying storms are the bank of nature's repo men coming to collect on that debt, repossessing our homes, our cars, our towns, even our very lives. These are billion-dollar disasters in the U.S., again, over the past 40 years, same time period as those first charts I showed you. You see where it's going. A more positive and forward-looking way to interpret this moment, though, is as a stern invitation to mature out of petroleum-powered, AI-enhanced capitalism's dangerous delusion that A, nature is some kind of bottomless trust fund that we can draw on at will with no consequences, and B, that we're somehow in charge. I don't care what business you're in, virtual or actual, nature owns 51% of it, at least. And I think we have a head start here. We understand that more than a lot of people do, living in this kind of environment. So we're lucky that way. Until we recognize the natural world as more than a full partner in everything we do, she will continue to remind us in progressively more violent ways, and she'll continue collecting on that debt. So let's be clear. Coal is an 18th century fuel. Oil, which still drives about 75–80% of the world's economic activity, is a 19th century fuel. The internal combustion engine was prototyped in 1860. Standard Oil, Exxon, what we call Imperial up here, was founded in 1870. Bitumen, what they're mining and melting up in Fort McMurray, is not a fuel at all. It's a driveway sealer. It takes billions of cubic feet of natural gas every day, every week, to melt and fractionate bitumen into substances American refineries are able to render. So why on earth are we still doing this, especially when scientists have understood the basics of the greenhouse effect literally since the 18th century? We've understood the heat-retaining qualities of CO2 since the 1850s. scientists were speculating on industrial CO2's potential for altering the climate by the 1890s. What's alarming and probably indictable is the fact that petroleum companies have known this for more than 50 years. In fact, they've been leaders in climate science. This presented a quandary. How do you separate oil from fire or burning from emissions? You can't. And so starting in the 1980s, the industry embarked on a disinformation campaign to disavow and undermine their own science. And they've been doing it ever since. So now, in 2025, we find ourselves living in an untenable contradiction. Even the Wall Street Journal, historically friendly to big business and big oil, has called them out. In 2023, they published an expose entitled Inside Exxon's Strategy to Downplay Climate Change. Kruger, by the way, is an alum, if you will, of Exxon in the States. Here's the strategy in a nutshell. Predatory delay. So this is Alex Steffen again. The deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others. This begs a question every one of us should be asking our prime minister, our governor, our mayor, our pastor, ourselves. How is it not a crime to willfully, knowingly, enthusiastically sabotage the future as the petroleum industry and its colluding investors and governments are doing now? And why would someone do that? John Kenneth Galbraith, a U.S. economist, ambassador, and author born in Canada, wrote, "People of privilege will risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage." Loyalty to the status quo, especially when it's profitable, is extraordinarily powerful and often corrupting. I think it derives from an elemental instinct for self-preservation that some might call selfishness or even greed, but I also think of Chandra Linder. The city's on fire, but we still want to do our dry cleaning, or graduate from college, or write a book, or go skiing. Just about all of us have plans for our day, for our lives, and they don't include climate change. The Fort McMurray fire occurred in 2016, which was then the hottest year in recorded history. But last year, 2024, was hotter still. You can see where this is going. This year, as I said, atmospheric CO2 levels exceeded 430 parts per million for the first time in about 15 million years. The longer major economies, not to mention our personal finances and transportation choices, remain hostage to the fossil fuel industry, which is currently trying to weaken protections for oil workers in dangerously hot conditions, the worse these fires, floods, heat waves, and droughts are going to get. The busier the Red Cross is going to be, and the more evacuations, heartbreak, and PTSD we and our neighbors are going to suffer. So I want to talk very briefly about insurance. Rhode Island Senator, I'm almost done here. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse summed it up well last June when he said, "This isn't complicated. Climate risk makes things uninsurable. No insurance makes things unmortgageable. No mortgages crashes the property markets. Crashed property markets trash the economy." So, friends, neighbors, the writing's on the wall and in these mountains, and it takes the form of a question. Are we going to go down clinging to a 20th century status quo in servitude to fire, or are we going to evolve using our collective brilliance, our capacity for collective action, our abundant gifts for invention, connection, and influence to lower the temperature, to recognize actively what makes life worth living, indeed, what makes our lives possible at all? And to this end, I want to leave you with a really potent word: reverescence. It means revitalize, regenerate, regrow. This is what the earth wants to do. Growing, flourishing is the earth's default mode. After the fire passes over, this is what's waiting underground. Those tender bulbs planted by human hands in the Abasand neighborhood of Fort McMurray ended up being the most durable part of that neighborhood, the only things that survived. And I took a teaching from that. Do your worst to me, and I will still return in beauty. Nature is showing us, it's modeling for us. Be like those tulips. So who's stopping us? Thank you.
You got to spread joy to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum, have faith, the pandemonium, liable to walk upon the sea.